Hello, everybody, and welcome back in to this edition of Duly Projected, where I am going to attempt being the keyword, to predict the California Democratic election primary results. Not to a T, but hopefully have some range for you guys, show you some polling data, let you know about race updates, how that's going to affect voting in California, to kind of figure out what's already baked in as far as early voting is concerned. So we're going to take a look at those figures, get into the math, as Andrew Yang would like to say. Let's get into the math of things and try to figure out first who's going to be our winner, what's the biggest takeaway with California, and all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and pull up my Excel spreadsheet here. Now, this is Super Tuesday. This is all the delegates that are up for grabs in Super Tuesday. As you can see, California has the most, then Texas, North Carolina, Virginia, Massachusetts. So we're going to focus on those states primarily, but there's still delegates to be had in those other states. So be interesting to see, how everybody comes out here. Now, let's go ahead and flip over to the polling. I'm going to back this up a little bit. So you can see this is the latest polling. This is from January at the bottom up to the latest polls that we have here. Sorry about that, guys. So you can see here Bernie Sanders pretty much leading the way. From the start of January, he attracted between 24 to 29%. Ever since that, he has gotten into 20s some, but mostly here in the 30s is where he's been residing. So I would say comfortably above 30% is where Bernie Sanders has been. Now let's take a look at Joe Biden's polling data in California. He had an outlier poll here in the first part of January. It was showing 30%. That was the only time that anybody other than Bernie Sanders led in polling in California. Since that time, he's kind of flattened out, hovering around the 15% range. Lately, he has closed well, though, between 19 to 22%. I think a lot of this is the field narrowing a bit, not to mention the most latest news, but just in general, may have improved him here, and then maybe also a strong performance in South Carolina. I don't know if his campaign overall has revitalized, but there seems to be some upswing from Joe Biden. Now, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, has kind of fallen off here. As far as you can see, he peaked here on a 21%. It's kind of like his outlier poll. Everything else has been around the 11 to 12% range. So let's keep that in mind when we're looking at our next bit of information that I've gathered. As you well know, Pete Buttigieg has gotten out of the race yesterday, Amy Klobuchar today. Today is Monday when I'm recording this. So that's going to impact voting. We're going to talk about that, how that impacts early voting, and all of that. Elizabeth Warren is hovering around the 14 to 15% range. I'll talk that in more detail about if she can get above the 15% threshold there. Now, this I'm not going to go into too big of a detail, but basically 416 delegates are up for grabs tomorrow in California. This talks a little bit about you need to reach that 15% threshold. Now, if a candidate does get 50% of the votes, they will get half of the at-large delegates. So I'll talk about that in a moment. But just to give you some idea of how the voting, California is an early voting state, and pretty much to form with every other state as far as needs 15% of voting to gain delegates. Let's talk about early voting in California. So far, this is from an article from Fox 26 News. So far, 2.7 million of 20.6 million registered voters have submitted early ballots. And there could be much more, but I'll let you know how I'm going to factor this into my calculation. Like I said, none of this is just all a guessing game, basically. But basically, Vice President of Data talks about 50% of registered voters will vote in the primary, is what they're estimating. So if there's 20 million registered voters, then about 10 million will vote. And if 2.7 million have already turned in their ballots, early voted, then I'm roughly guesstimating that 27% of ballots are in. So when we look at this California calculation, which I've gotten this aggregate number from, let me pull that up. I have this aggregate number here from polling. This is the polling aggregate you can see here. That's where I've pulled that from. This is these numbers. And what I've done is anybody above 15%, I'm giving them green. Green means go. Anybody under 15% is red. Which Buttigieg and Klobuchar, they are out of the race. But this is what their polling data was. 7 and 4.7%. So what I've done is I've baked in 27% of that support. So this is what they would receive, as far as the current ballots. So I've adjusted these numbers in proportion to that. So the remaining votes that are out there, I've adjusted to the rest of the candidates. And the way I've done this is taken from a poll, who would be your second choice. So I've allocated this with the percentage of who would be your second choice. So let's talk about quickly the adjusted figures here and how comfortable I feel with these numbers. Bernie at 38.7% seems a bit high, but I could, support that from his polling data. Biden at 21.3%, Warren at 19.2%, and Bloomberg barely getting over that 15% threshold. I don't see Bloomberg getting over that mark. I do believe he'll fall short, I think as high as 14%. Now, it's a big deal if he does get to the 15% because he's basically dragging 63 delegates away from either Bernie or Biden, even Warren, if you think that she has a path to the nomination. So this is the biggest point of my projections, is that I'm not giving Bloomberg any delegates. So what happens to the rest of those delegates? Well, we're going to proportion them out to the people who are above 15%, which I think Bernie, Biden, and Warren will reach those marks in California. So that gives that gives me Bernie at least 200 delegates, I'm assuming. Biden around 110, and then a Warren around 100. So we'll see if these delegates come out to fruition for these candidates and what the returns will be. But I think this will be the start of a big day for Bernie. I don't think Biden will have like a catastrophe of the day, but we'll look at a overall Super Tuesday scoreboard, as you may, from my projections, to kind of see what a good range of delegate proportion will, which candidates will receive, roughly the amount of delegates, which you can see here, 1,344 delegates are up for grabs tomorrow, and that is roughly about 33% of the total delegates as far as, that are given out from the elections themselves. So not including like super delegates or any delegates that will be coming out once the convention rolls out. So we will watch for that. and check out my next video, as I will be breaking down the Texas election on Super Tuesday and where I project delegates to go there. So thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a terrific day. Thanks.